The air in the courtroom is thick, stale, tasting of old paper and unspoken resentments. He sits across the aisle, beside his lawyer, a picture of controlled confidence. His suit is impeccable, his tie a power red. He refuses to look at me, his gaze fixed somewhere just over my shoulder. But I can feel his presence, a cold, heavy weight I've carried for months. His lawyer is presenting numbers, charts, painting a picture of my financial incompetence, my dependence, my unreasonable demands. He smiles faintly when his lawyer emphasizes the blocked accounts, the strategic financial chokehold he applied, designed to starve me into submission. He thinks he has me. He thinks the lack of access, the months of struggle, the sheer, grinding pressure has broken me. He thinks he's won the war before I've even fired a shot. My lawyer stands, calm, collected, sorting through a stack of documents. There's a quiet ripple of anticipation, though most people here probably expect more of the same, back and forth about assets, about income, about what little was left for me after he sealed off everything. They don't know. He doesn't know. My lawyer picks up a single, slim folder. It looks deceptively ordinary. My hands are clenched in my lap, knuckles white. My breath is shallow. This is it. The moment everything shifts. The moment his carefully constructed world of control and arrogance comes crashing down. My lawyer approaches the stand, the folder held loosely. Time stretches, elastic and thin. I watch his face, waiting for the mask to crack. Waiting for the moment the color drains from his cheeks. It's coming. And he has no idea. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Before the courtroom, before the frozen accounts, there was just us. A life built brick by brick, quiet and ordinary in the best possible way. We had the house, the dog, the comfortable routine that felt less like a cage and more like a warm blanket. He worked hard, I managed things at home. We went out for dinner on Fridays, visited family on Sundays. We talked about the future, about maybe remodeling the kitchen, about where we'd go for our big anniversary trip. It wasn't a fairy tale, no grand gestures every day, but it was steady, dependable. It felt like ground beneath my feet. Our finances were intertwined, a single thread running through our lives. Joint accounts for everything, savings, checking, investments. It made sense. We were a unit. His money was my money was his money. It was our money. We planned together, saved together. There was complete trust. I handled most of the day-to-day bills, the budgeting, the paperwork. He trusted me implicitly with the money, just as I trusted him implicitly with everything. It felt safe, secure, like a fortress built on mutual respect and shared goals. I never even thought about separate accounts, never considered the need for a financial safety net just for me. Why would I? He was my safety net. We were each other's safety net. That was the promise, wasn't it? Spoken and unspoken. The quiet, unwavering promise of us. The belief that no matter what life threw our way, we would face it together, splitting the load, sharing the burden, sharing the victory. The joint accounts were just a symbol of that fundamental truth. Our lives joined. Our finances joined. Simple. Safe. Or so I thought. The first tremor wasn't the divorce talk. Not really. It was smaller, subtler. A shift in the air, a growing distance that I first attributed to stress at his job, to the natural evolution of a long marriage. He was home less, or when he was home, he was distracted, preoccupied. Our Friday nights became less frequent. The future plans grew vague, then stopped being mentioned at all. I tried to talk to him, to ask what was wrong. He'd brush it off, say he was tired, say it was nothing. A wall was slowly, silently, being built between us, invisible but palpable. I told myself I was overthinking being needy. I told myself marriages have phases, ebbs and flows. This was just an ebb. The flow would return. I held on to that belief like a lifeline. Then came the day he delivered the line. It wasn't a conversation, not really. It was a statement, delivered in the living room, the one we'd picked out paint colors for together, the one where we'd curled up on the sofa, planning our future. He stood by the fireplace, not looking at me. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I want a divorce just like that.
No preâmbulo, no explanation, no apologe.
Just the clinical pronouncement that ripped the foundation out from under my feet. The world tilted. The air left the room. I remember the silence that followed, punctuated only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that suddenly felt deafeningly loud, marking the seconds of my life falling apart. My first instinct was confusion, denial. This couldn't be happening. Not us. Not my safe, steady life. But his face, when he finally looked at me, was hard, resolved. There was no room for negotiation, no space for discussion. The decision was made. And in that moment, the joint accounts, the shared future, the interwoven lives, it all became a tangled mess of logistics, heartache, and terrifying uncertainty. The emotional earthquake had hit, but the financial one was still rumbling beneath the surface, preparing to unleash its own brand of destruction. I just didn't know how deep the fault line ran yet. The days that followed were a blur of shock and disbelief. Living in the same house felt surreal, like we were actors in a play where the script had been ripped up and replaced with something bleak and unfamiliar. The future I thought was certain evaporated. Panic started to set in, a cold knot in my stomach. How do I live? How do I pay for things? Everything was tied up together. I went online to check our joint checking account, just to see what was there, to start wrapping my head around the practicalities. The login I'd used for years, the password I knew by heart. It didn't work. I tried again, thinking I must have mistyped. Didn't work. I tried the savings account login. Same result. Access denied. My heart started pounding. This wasn't right. I called the bank. The automated system wouldn't let me pass the initial security questions, requiring information I suddenly didn't have or that seemed to have been changed. I called the special customer service line, waited on hold for what felt like an eternity, the chirpy music a cruel contrast to the rising panic within me. When I finally spoke to a person, I explained the situation, the divorce, the inability to access the joint accounts. There was a pause. Then, the polite, measured voice on the other end delivered the blow. The primary account holder had placed restrictions. All online access for secondary users had been disabled. Withdrawals required specific authorization from him. For all accounts. Every single one. He had blocked me. Completely. From our money. The money we had earned together, saved together. The money I had managed for years. He had just locked me out. It was a physical sensation like a punch to the gut. The shock was profound. This wasn't just about control in the divorce. This felt vindictive, cruel. It wasn't necessary. There were legal ways to handle assets during a divorce. But this felt like a deliberate attempt to render me helpless, to cut off my oxygen supply. It was the first clear sign that this wouldn't be an amicable separation. It was a war. And he had fired the first shot, a silent, brutal one aimed squarely at my ability to simply exist. The fear that had been a knot became a vice, tightening around my chest. How was I going to buy groceries? Pay for gas? Consult a lawyer? He had thought of everything. He hadn't just ended the marriage. He was trying to erase me financially. The early struggles were raw, humiliating. I had to borrow money from my sister just to fill up my car. I used cash I'd had stashed away for emergencies, a small, insignificant amount compared to what was locked away, to buy food. Every transaction was a stark reminder of my powerlessness. I tried talking to him again, pleading, explaining I needed access for basic living expenses. He was stone cold. "You'll get what you're entitled to through the divorce," he'd say, his voice devoid of warmth. "My lawyer is handling everything by making me beg for scraps?" It was a calculated move, I realized. Starve me out. Make me desperate enough to agree to anything just to survive. Getting a lawyer was a hurdle in itself. Consultations cost money I barely had. I found one eventually, a woman who seemed kind, empathetic. But when I explained the blocked accounts, her response was less than aggressive. "It's a common tactic," she'd say, sighing. "We can file a motion for temporary support, but it takes time. Judges don't always prioritize immediate access to funds unless there's absolute destitution, and even then, she painted a picture of a slow, bureaucratic process where I would continue to struggle financially while the legal wheels turned. It wasn't her fault, exactly. That was the reality of the legal system. But I felt deflated, unheard. The system felt slow, cumbersome, and inadequate against the speed and precision of his financial attack. His lawyer, on the other hand, seemed to be moving at lightning speed, filing papers, setting deadlines, pushing for discovery, all while I was scrambling to figure out how to pay my rent next month. He leveraged the blocked accounts at every turn. His lawyer's initial settlement offer was insulting, a fraction of what was fair, contingent on me signing away any claim to significant assets. The implication was clear. Take this pittance now, or wait months, maybe a year or more, fighting through the courts with no access to money. The pressure was immense. Every bill that arrived felt like a personal attack from him. The refrigerator was looking bare. I was rationing everything. The shame of having to ask for help, the fear of losing everything I had helped build, it was crushing. He had built his financial fortress, and I was trapped outside, watching the drawbridge being pulled up. The rising challenges weren't just legal, they were existential. Could I survive this? Could I fight someone who had already cut off my supply lines? He grew more arrogant, his confidence fueled by my visible struggle. He thought he had won. Everything felt like it was spiraling. The initial lawyer, while kind, just wasn't cutting it. We filed the motion for temporary support, but it got bogged down in paperwork, delays. Meanwhile, his lawyer was relentless, demanding documents I couldn't easily access, setting unreasonable deadlines. My own lawyer kept advising patience, telling me to trust the process. But the process felt like it was designed to grind me into dust. My savings dwindled. The small loans from my sister weren't sustainable. I was facing the very real possibility of not being able to afford my own legal representation much longer. The thought of representing myself against his aggressive lawyer and his smug confidence was terrifying. I felt completely alone, exposed. It wasn't just about money anymore, it was about dignity, about survival. One night, sitting in the quiet, dark house, staring at the unopened bills scattered across the table like fallen leaves, I hit bottom. The despair was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. I had done everything right, or so I thought. I had been a good partner, a good wife, built a life based on trust and shared values. And for that, I was being systematically dismantled, financially erased. The injustice of it was a bitter taste in my mouth. I felt defeated. Truly, utterly defeated. Giving up seemed not just likely, but perhaps the only rational option. Agree to his terms, take the pittance, disappear. It would be over. The struggle would end. The cold, gnawing fear in my stomach would stop. But then, something shifted. Maybe it was the memory of his face in those last few months, the detachment, the subtle cruelty I had missed or chosen to ignore. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of him blocking me from accounts I had poured years of my life into building. Maybe it was just the primal instinct to survive. I looked at the bills, the symbol of his power over me, and something hardened inside me. Not despair, but a cold, quiet fury. This wasn't just about money. This was about principle. This was about not letting him break me. He thought he could just discard me, strip me bare, and walk away? Not a chance. I realized relying solely on the slow, predictable legal path wasn't enough. He wasn't fighting fair, so why should I? I needed to find leverage. Something he didn't expect. Something that would hit him where it hurt the most, his control, his image, maybe even his wallet in a way he hadn't anticipated. My mind, dulled by fear and despair for so long, started to whir, thinking, connecting dots. There had been subtle things before the divorce announcement, things that hadn't made sense at the time. Unusual expenses on credit card statements I used to handle before he blocked access to those, too. Late nights that weren't explained by working, a new phone he suddenly had, a number he wouldn't share. He hadn't just decided to leave. He had likely decided to leave for someone. And if he was spending money on her, using our money, while simultaneously freezing me out, that changed everything. That wasn't just a divorce tactic, that was financial misconduct. That was using marital assets to fund an affair while making the wife destitute. That was the key. I needed proof. Not just of an affair. Affairs are morally wrong but often legally irrelevant in divorce unless linked to financial issues. I needed proof of financial support for that affair, using marital funds. This became my mission. My new turning point. I stopped focusing solely on surviving day to day and started focusing on fighting back. With precision. With strategy. I knew his weaknesses. His arrogance, his belief in his own cleverness, his fear of public humiliation. I needed to build a case against him that went beyond simply dividing assets. I needed to expose his deceit. This wasn't about vengeance, not really. It was about justice. About not letting him get away with destroying my life and then walking away with everything, free to start a new life with someone else on the ruins of our shared past. The cold fury had given way to a steely resolve. I was going to fight, and I was going to fight smart. The investigation became my full-time job, conducted in the dead of night after struggling through the day. It was painstaking, frustrating work, filled with dead ends and moments of doubt. I started with the small clues I remembered. That unexplained credit card statement from months ago. Could I find a record of it somewhere? Digging through old paper files felt like archaeology, sifting through layers of our shared history, looking for anomalies. I found a few receipts for expensive gifts I never received, billed to our joint card but purchased when he was supposedly working late, small things, easily explainable away at the time. But now, in the context of the divorce, they screamed betrayal. Then there was the phone. He'd been glued to it, always keeping it face down. After he left the house for good, I found an old tablet he'd left behind. It was password protected, but after several frustrating attempts and remembering a sequence of numbers significant to him, I got in. It was mostly wiped, but buried deep in a cloud backup, I found traces, deleted messages, email fragments. The fragments didn't give me a name, but they hinted at communication with someone new, someone he was excited about, someone who seemed to be expecting things, expensive things. The language wasn't explicit about an affair, but it was intimate, planning dates, talking about future plans that clearly didn't involve me. More importantly, the email fragments contained references to places, addresses, and even a first name. Chloe. A quick search revealed a social media profile for a woman named Chloe in a nearby town. Her profile was public. It was a digital shrine to a life of leisure, expensive dinners, designer bags, trips to places we had always talked about going together. The timeline aligned perfectly with the period he had become distant, with the unexplained expenses. And her lifestyle. It was significantly beyond what her stated profession, something vague about consulting, would likely support. Could he be funding this? But I needed proof of financial transactions, not just social media posts. How could I get access to her bank statements? Legally, that was impossible without a court order, and I wouldn't get that without already having significant evidence of financial misconduct. This was the biggest hurdle. I consulted with my lawyer about the potential for discovery, demanding his financial records for the past few years. She agreed to file the request, but warned it could take time, and he could fight it, redact information. I felt a new sense of urgency. Time was money, and I was quickly running out of both. I continued digging. What public information was available? Property records? Business filings? I found no obvious ties, no joint businesses. He was careful. Too careful. It felt like hitting a wall. Multiple walls. Doubt started to creep back in. Was I chasing ghosts? Was I just a paranoid, angry ex-wife seeing things that weren't there? The exhaustion was bone deep. Late nights spent staring at spreadsheets and browser histories blurred into early mornings filled with the dread of another day with no financial freedom. Then a breakthrough, small but significant. While sorting through old tax documents, I found a statement from a lesser-used investment account, one I hadn't thought about in years because it required a separate login he'd set up. Out of morbid curiosity, I tried to access it. To my astonishment, the login still worked for this specific account. It must have been an oversight on his part when he locked down everything else. The account itself wasn't huge, and it didn't show his main income, but it showed transfers. Regular, significant transfers. And the recipient? Not a name, but an account number. And next to the account number, in the transfer details field, a recurring note. Rent or loan repayment. But the amounts were far too high for rent in our area, and there had been no discussion of a loan. I cross-referenced the transfer dates with Chloe's social media posts. The dates matched her trips, her expensive purchases. It was circumstantial, but it pointed strongly to him funding her life. But I still needed the link between that account number and her.
How to do that?
Subpoenaing the bank records associated with that account number during discovery was the legal route, but again, it would be slow, contested. I needed something faster, something undeniable for the courtroom. My mind went back to the tax documents. There was a section about deductions, business expenses. He traveled occasionally for work. He always paid for hotels, flights, etc. on his corporate card, but sometimes there were miscellaneous expenses, reimbursed later, that he put on a personal card linked to our joint account. Before he blocked access, I had a vague memory of seeing a charge from a company I didn't recognize. I dug out old, shredded statements, carefully piecing together fragments. The charge was from a financial consulting firm. The date aligned with one of the larger transfers from the investment account. Could Chloe's vague consulting job be linked? Could this firm be a front? It was a long shot, but I contacted a private investigator. Expensive, another drain on my limited funds, but necessary. I provided the PI with Chloe's name, her social media, the timeline, the unusual transfers, the name of the consulting firm from the receipt. The PI worked quickly. Within a couple of weeks, they came back with information. Chloe was listed as the registered agent for a small LLC with the same name as the consulting firm on his receipt. The LLC's registered address was a mailbox in a strip mall. And the bank account linked to the LLC? The account number matched the one on the transfers from his investment account. This was it. This was the proof. He wasn't just paying her living expenses. He was routing money through a shell company registered to her, using marital funds from an account I had helped build, while simultaneously starving me financially. It was calculated, deliberate financial deception. And I had the paper trail. The transfers from his account, the receipt from the shell company registered to her, the link between them. It wasn't a bank statement from her directly, which would have been nearly impossible to get, but it was proof, undeniable proof, that he was funneling our money to her through a fake business structure. I took everything to my lawyer. She was quiet as she reviewed the PI's report, the transfer statements, the LLC registration. When she looked up, her expression was no longer just empathetic. It was sharp, strategic. This, she said, tapping the folder, changes everything. This wasn't just an affair. This was potentially fraudulent transfer of marital assets. This wasn't just him being controlling. This was him actively depleting marital funds to support someone else, while denying me access. This evidence would completely undermine his claims of financial prudence and my alleged irresponsibility. It painted him as deceitful, manipulative, and wasteful of marital resources. In the eyes of the court, that was far more damning than just blocking accounts during a contentious divorce. We prepared for court. My lawyer adjusted her strategy. The focus shifted from proving my need for funds to proving his financial misconduct and deceit. The discovery he'd tried to delay now felt less critical. I already had the evidence I needed, evidence he didn't know I had. We kept the information about the PI and the specific nature of the evidence completely confidential. We didn't mention Chloe by name in any filings before the hearing, referring only to improper dissipation of marital assets and transfers to third parties. He and his lawyer would have no idea what was coming. Walking into the courtroom that day, the tension was immense. It felt like the culmination of months of struggle, fear, and silent investigation. He was there, looking confident, maybe even a little bored by the proceedings he clearly expected to go his way. His lawyer presented his arguments efficiently, focusing on his income, my lack of income, painting me as a burden, arguing for a minimal settlement, emphasizing how he had managed their finances and built their wealth, downplaying my contributions. The blocked accounts were framed as a necessary measure to protect assets during contentious litigation. His lawyer cited case law, presented spreadsheets showing his alleged financial prudence, contrasting it with what she portrayed as my history of unnecessary spending, referring to completely normal household expenses I used to manage. It was a carefully crafted narrative designed to make me look financially incompetent and him look like the responsible party, simply trying to preserve what was theirs from my grasping hands. He sat there, nodding along, a faint, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. He looked directly at me once, just for a second, and there was pity in his eyes. Pity and triumph. He thought he had won. He thought the starvation tactic had worked. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood. She started calmly, addressing some of the points his lawyer had made, outlining my contributions to the marriage, my role in managing the household finances, before he locked me out. The judge listened, impassive. It felt like standard divorce proceedings, perhaps underwhelming after the aggressive presentation from his side. I saw the fleeting look of confusion on his face. Was this all we had? Were we just going to argue about contributions? His lawyer exchanged a brief, confident glance with him. Then my lawyer changed tack. Her voice remained calm, but there was a new edge to it. "Your Honor," she said, turning towards the judge, "we would like to introduce evidence that speaks to the true nature of the respondent's financial actions and the dissipation of marital assets." She walked over to the clerk, handing over the slim folder. The clerk stamped it, passed it to the judge. The judge opened the folder and began to read. I watched his face. The confidence wavered first. His brow furrowed slightly as the judge read the contents. Then confusion dawned. What was this? It wasn't about our joint accounts, not directly. It wasn't about my spending habits. The color began to drain from his face, just as I had imagined it would. His eyes widened slightly. His lawyer, sitting beside him, leaned in, whispering, "What is it?" But he seemed unable to speak. He just stared at the documents in the judge's hand. The judge finished reading, then looked up, first at my lawyer, then directly at him. The judge's voice was steady, but carried immense weight. "Counselor," he said, addressing his lawyer, "can you explain these transfers? And the nature of this financial consulting firm registered to Ms. Chloe Harris? And its connection to your client?" His lawyer looked completely blindsided. She hadn't seen this coming. She scrambled for the folder, which the judge's clerk handed to her. As she scanned the documents, the transfer records, the PI's report, the LLC registration showing Chloe's name and the matching account number, her face went pale. She shot a horrified look at her client. He finally found his voice, a strangled sound. That's not," he stammered, but the words caught in his throat. My lawyer calmly explained the evidence, connecting the dots. The regular transfers from his account, funded by his income, which was marital income, to the account of the LLC, registered to Chloe Harris, whose social media documented a lifestyle consistent with receiving significant financial support, coinciding with the period of his emotional distance and financial restrictions against me. She didn't need to say, "Mistress," the evidence spoke volumes. She argued that these transfers constituted a deliberate dissipation of marital assets, fraud, and a clear attempt to hide funds and support an extramarital relationship using money that rightfully belonged to both of us. His carefully constructed image of financial responsibility shattered in an instant. He wasn't protecting assets. He was siphoning them off to fund his affair while leaving me penniless. The room was silent, heavy with the weight of the reveal. His lawyer was whispering urgently to him, her face a mask of panic. He was visibly shaking, his face bright red, his eyes wide with disbelief and fury, directed not at me, but at his lawyer, at the universe, for allowing his secret to be exposed so publicly, so utterly. He started to raise his voice, sputtering denials, trying to interrupt. "She hired a private investigator? You can't do that. This is illegal," he yelled, pointing at me, his control completely gone. The judge's voice cut through his outburst, sharp and authoritative. "Mr. Smith, control yourself. "This is a courtroom," he turned back to his lawyer. "Counselor, your client needs to understand the gravity of this evidence. This is not merely about valuing assets. This speaks directly to credibility, conduct, and potentially impacts the division of assets significantly. It also casts a serious shadow over your client's claims regarding his financial state and his motivations for restricting Ms. Smith's access to funds." His lawyer tried to recover, murmuring something about needing time to review the new evidence, needing to depose the PI. But the damage was done. The smug confidence he'd carried for months was replaced by raw, public humiliation and panic. He had been so sure of his plan, so certain he could use money to control and defeat me. He never imagined I would look beyond the blocked accounts, that I would uncover the reason why he needed to lock me out, that I would follow the money trail leading directly to his secret life and use it as a weapon. He was blindsided.
Completely.
His attempt to financially ruin me had backfired spectacularly, exposing his deceit and strengthening my case tenfold. His face was a picture of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. He had been so focused on the walls he was building around me that he hadn't seen the ground crumbling beneath him. Leaving the courtroom was surreal. The air outside felt lighter, even though the sky was gray. He and his lawyer were deep in hushed, frantic conversation.
He wouldn't look at me.
The victory felt strange. It wasn't the triumphant moment I might have imagined during the darkest days. It was tinged with sadness, with the finality of seeing the marriage for what it truly became, a battlefield, ending not with mutual respect, but with exposure and humiliation. The legal aftermath was swift and decisive. The evidence of financial misconduct was damning. The judge took a very dim view of his actions. The settlement wasn't just fair, it was significantly in my favor, reflecting the dissipation of assets and compensating me for the hardship he had caused. He was ordered to pay substantial alimony, not just based on his income, but also reflecting the money he had diverted. The joint accounts were unfrozen, the assets divided according to the new terms. It wasn't just about getting back what was mine, it was about getting back more than I would have been entitled to in a standard, clean divorce. His attempt to financially cripple me had cost him dearly. I was financially secure again, perhaps even better off than before the divorce started. The immediate terror of not being able to afford basic necessities was gone. I could pay my bills, rebuild my life, afford to fix the leaky faucet he'd ignored for months. But the emotional scars remained. The trust that had been so fundamental to my understanding of the world, of relationships, was broken. The man I had built a life with, shared everything with, had systematically tried to destroy me. Winning felt less like conquering a mountain and more like surviving a brutal storm. I was standing, battered but upright, on solid ground, but the landscape was irrevocably changed. The house felt different now, no longer a symbol of shared dreams, but a monument to a life that had been a lie. I decided to sell it. A clean break. A new beginning, built not on joint accounts and shared histories, but on my own resilience and the hard-won knowledge that security comes from within, not just from a name on a bank statement. The legal battle was over, but the personal journey of healing was just beginning. The dry humor I'd sometimes used as a shield felt brittle now. There was tragedy in the loss, in the betrayal, even in the victory. But there was also hope. Hope in the strength I hadn't known I possessed. Hope in the future I would build, brick by brick, on my own terms. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.